a lot of us think, oh, the longer you age a bottle, the better it'll be. It could be like, oh, it's 20 years old, 30 years old. Certain wines have certain aging potential. There are some wines that have a shelf life for like, let's say 10 years or 5 years. And then after that period, the wine will start turning.
That has happened to someone that I know, and they're like, oh, I've got this 20-year-old bottle of wine. It was a grape balsamic.
Yeah, there you go. Especially if you visited some vineyards and, you go down in the cave and they have like these, 1920s bottles on display. And it's guaranteed if you open up that bottle, it's going to be vinegar.
I'm Aimee Macedo.
And I'm Jenny Arena.
And we're Bits and Bites. When the air becomes crisp and the leaves begin to change color is when you typically find crates of fragrant wine grapes in the hands of vintners. Through an old age process, these perfect purple and green gems are transformed into the glorious beverage we know as wine.
We're ready to have a grape conversation with winemaker and co-owner of Downtown Winery, Aimee Macedo, and learn more about the art of winemaking.
So, Aimee, how difficult is it to make wine? Does it require any type of certification?
Okay, in terms of level of difficulty, wine is truly a work of art. So I would definitely say there's a lot of experimenting that goes on with wine, and you certainly need a bit of knowledge. So now is kind of the perfect time if people do want to experiment. It is harvest season. A lot of, especially being European, a lot of us have grown up knowing family members who make their own wine. And it's really been taught, generation after generation. So realistically, anyone can make wine, but it does require some equipment and certainly some patience. You can't automatically drink your beverage. You certainly have to let it age and sit and all of that before consuming. But some of the equipment that is used, you would have to purchase possibly like a crusher or a press. There are vessels that you need to hold the wine. So maybe you guys have heard of like a demijohn. That's just a large glass vessel. There's carboy, stainless steel tanks. So there is a little bit of investment that is also needed when it comes to making your wine. And then some ingredients, so you may have to add some yeast to the wine or clarifying agents. The good thing is, luckily, 2 of our locations, we do sell all of these ingredients or equipment. So if people are looking to get any of that stuff, we can certainly help them out. But is a certificate needed? If you do want to become a winemaker, you would have to obtain like a bachelor's in science under the viticulture and enology. So viticulture is simply the study of grape cultivation, while enology is the study of winemaking. So we actually have a winemaker on staff that will assist us with a lot of our processes that come with the winemaking. And he is considered like an enologist.
So in terms of anyone wanting to try winemaking on their own, aside from the equipment and the education, are there any other tips that you would give them?
Yeah, have fun with it. Like this is it. Wine is such a beautiful thing where we should be playful with it and we should experiment with it, So certainly experimenting with different grape varietals, even possibly blending wines. I did mention, definitely being patient is very important. You'll reap the benefits after once you have the finished product. But yeah, I think, really being playful about it and not taking it too seriously, especially if you're a beginner in the stage. And I think it really does depend on the quality of the grapes that you're getting. So if you are getting a really good quality grape, you should be pretty guaranteed in getting a nice, decent batch of wine at the end.
What are the qualifications for a good quality grape?
So good quality grape, it really depends on the harvest season. Mother Nature takes her course. So, there needs to be enough sugar in a grape. There should be balanced acidity in the grape. So these are a lot of things that the winemaker will look at. And from there, even when it is time to pick the grape off the vine, they are measuring all of these things to ensure that it is going to be at its optimal stage.
What are some of your favorite blends?
Ooh, that's such a personal question overall. I would say if it was a blend, there's a lovely blend that you can certainly find in France and Australia, but it's called a GSM. So the three grapes there would be Grenache, Mauvais, and Syrah. So that's kind of the triple combination. But single varietals, oh, there's so many. It really depends on what I'm eating as well, right? But of course, your typical Cabernet Sauvignon is, it's such a staple. I feel most people gravitate towards that, and I do appreciate a really nice Cabernet Sauvignon. But there's even a unique grape called Touriga Nacional, which is like the national grape of Portugal. That's a really, really lovely grape. So I feel like now, even for myself, I'm at a stage where I'm really trying to also expand my palate and try different types of wines, and even kind of indigenous grapes from specific regions. So it is kind of harder to come across overall.
What is, maybe one of the hardest things about winemaking year in and year out that you've noticed?
Winemaking in general, it is very labor intensive. We do have to be on our toes when it comes to making sure the wines are properly stored. Even during the winemaking process, like sanitation is a very important thing. And we are very dependent on Mother Nature. Actually, what's interesting as a side note for you guys too, like grapes need to struggle a bit. So typically it can't have too much water or sunshine. Ideal temperature for grapes would be warmer days and cooler nights. So what this does is it kind of shocks the grape a bit. So it actually forces the roots of the plant to search deeper into the soil for water and minerals. So therefore, I mean, you are going to have less quantity, but you're going to have better quality overall. And the soil in itself, like different wine regions across the world will have different soil types. And that'll certainly influence the flavor of the wine.
And that's when we get into that whole discussion of terroir, right? Like the drier climates and all of that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like if it's more of a limestone versus the clay, certain levels of minerality may shine through. And yeah, like it's very interesting. So like there's a lot of nature influences in wine, especially in the flavor profile of it as well.
Now, Aimee, are there any different things to keep in mind when you're making like a red wine versus a white wine, for example?
Yeah, of course. They are completely different. So when you are traditionally making white wine, the process is like, I mean, you do want to destem the grapes, you want to crush it, and then you also want to press it. So the thing that you're getting is going to be the juice or the mosto, which we refer it as. Now, there is something called orange wine. I don't know if you ladies have heard of orange
Yes, I
wine. It's
have. I was
something
going
that
to
is
ask about that.
trending. Oh, yes. Okay. So orange wine, the way that's going to be made more similar to red wine. So with orange wine, what they do is they'll actually get the juice, but they'll leave the skin of the grape intact. And that's exactly how red wine is made. With red wine, the skin is what gives color to the wine. This is why they are calling it orange wine. It's not made from oranges, it's made from grapes, but it has more of an orangey color because of the contact of the skin. So with red wine, if you think about it, if you peel the skin of a red grape, it's transparent. So it is the skin that will give the color. And the thicker the skin, the deeper the color and the more antioxidants, the healthier the wine is for you. But what's interesting with the skins, they'll typically leave them in, it could be from 3 days all the way up to around 100 days. So the longer you actually leave the skins in, we call that like a prolonged maceration period. It'll benefit the wine just by creating smoother tannins. So the tannins are really that thing, that sensation in your mouth that dries out, like that dry sensation, similar to like when you're eating walnuts or something. So those are the tannins. So that's kind of an interest, like a difference between the two. But red wine, of course, can also age much longer than white wines. White wines are typically consumed young, while, of course, the red wine certainly will benefit from aging. Another cool thing is the longer you leave wine in a barrel, typically red wine. I mean, there are some whites that you will age in a barrel, especially a Chardonnay, for example. But the longer you age a wine in a barrel, the longer aging potential it has.
Interesting.
Sometimes you'll see in the back label, it'll say, oh, age 6 months in American oak, and, another 6 months they might even mix it with French oak, for what have you, or whatever. Sometimes it could be 2 years, 3 years. But the longer it does age in a barrel, the more aging potential it has. But the oaking will also soften those tannins believe it or not. It'll kind of just make the wine either a little bit creamier or silkier. It'll definitely have that influence. And then lastly, the other difference would be that red wine will lighten in color with age, while white wine will darken. So a lot of times when people are doing like these blind tastings, for example, they're looking at the wine, they're looking at the color, and then if they're noticing the tinge or even the rim of the wine is lightening up a little bit, then that can also help predict the vintage, like the year that the wine was made.
Oh, I did not know that.
That's very well. That would explain why I remember traveling to Italy one year and my uncle pulled out a bottle that I think was, I don't know, 30 years old or so.
Yeah,
and it looked almost like cognac. Like it didn't even have red in it anymore.
It becomes so muted, right? Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. And there is like this one thing also for people to be aware of. A lot of us think, oh, the longer you age a bottle, the better it's going to, the better it'll be. It could be like, oh, it's 20 years old, 30 years old. And certain wines have certain aging potential. So not all wines will benefit from aging for 20 years. There are some wines that have a shelf life for like, let's say 10 years or 5 years. And then after that period, the wine will start churning. So people really have to be cautious and kind of do their research.
Yeah, you can't see me, but I am smiling here because that has happened to someone that I know. And they're like, oh, I've got this 20-year-old bottle of wine. It was a grape balsamic. But that's
yeah, there you go. This is it. It can start turning. Yeah. And it's true. Like, there is that, especially if you visited some vineyards and, you go down in the cave and they have like these, 1920s bottles on display. And it's like, people are so amused. And I think it's just representing like that was an amazing vintage year and it was great. But guaranteed, if you open up that bottle, it's going to be vinegar, you know? So,
the only thing touching it is a piece of lettuce.
Yeah. Exactly. That's so funny.
How do you know when you have a particularly good vintage?
Once again, weather, if the temperature favored the grapes, like typically what they say as a general rule is that every 5 years, there's going to be a phenomenal vintage where, the temperature was just right. There was just enough rain, enough sunshine. But yeah, it would be really, really dependent on the weather and completely out of our control. For example, let's say if it's a year where, there was too much rain or there wasn't enough sunshine, these winemakers, they are so skilled in, really making magic. Even if they have to blend, different grapes together to get certain profiles, they'll do that. If they have to oak the wine and let's say, French oak versus American oak, this is why there are winemakers out there in the world because, year in and year out, like it's not always going to be guaranteed the same weather that we had last summer.
I just have a curiosity, just because based on the fact that we, our European backgrounds, and we did kind of grow up around the whole winemaking process. How much? I mean, we talked about how it's an art form and it's a science, but like, how much stock do you also put into a little bit of superstition? Because I know there's always like those superstitions around winemaking, right?
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, we have so many clients where they're like, "Hey, when's the full moon? When's the yeah, absolutely." Or like the new moon, right? There's the new moon, the full moon. I feel like I do believe in a little bit of that, 100%. Like people really followed, just the moon cycle for generate like for thousands of years. There are gravitational pulls coming in from the moon, so yeah, I definitely think there is some truth in that. And like, that would be biodynamic farming. And like, there's a lot of biodynamic wineries these days that really follow these type of kind of superstitions and these rules. So, yeah, I think, it's kind of cool to see that people and wineries are now dedicating themselves to following the moon cycle as well. So it's like from even when you bottle the wine, it's like, I can't remember if it's a full moon or a new moon. Like they have to make sure they bottle on this day. So yeah, it's funny to hear, but
it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that it's almost being adapted as part of the quote unquote technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, Mary, what did you learn today?
So I learned quite a bit, I think, but one of the things that stands out the most for me is that the color of the wine over the aging process. So when she mentioned that the red wine turns almost like you mentioned a cognac color, and the white wine, so the red gets lighter with age, the white gets darker with age.
Well, what I took away from this episode was, no matter the weather, there's 100% chance of wine in my forecast.
Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Bits and Bites on your favorite podcast player and leave us a review and star rating. You can also visit our website at bitsandbitespodcast.com.
We'd like to thank our editor, Matt Agnew, and remind you all to take a little time to chew, chat, and chuckle.
When the air becomes crisp and the leaves begin to change colors. Okay, Matt, here's the real one.